Everyone, hello, welcome back to another episode of Marvin's Room. Thank you guys, as always, for tuning in and rocking with me on this journey. Listen, today have a great video for you guys. Another fresh perspective from another thought leader that was around before Neville. And I wanted to get into this video today to talk to you guys about this guy that you may not be familiar with. Because let's face it, in my opinion, the law of attraction, law of assumption community is saturated with Neville Goddard material. And Neville has built a cult like following. I think we all know that have been studying this stuff for a long time. And I think it's very refreshing to get other perspectives from other great thought leaders that are doing the same things very similar to Neville. And also, too, some people may have a different perspective that may click, it may hit differently with you when you listen to some of the words that they say. So today I wanted to bring a new perspective, kind of in a sense, from another guy, like I said, guy named Emile Coue. Hopefully I'm saying his name wrong. That shit sound kind of French. I don't know, but um he was he was a psychologist, also a pharmacist, and he was around maybe like the mid 1800s, like 1850s. I think 57 is when he was born, and I think he lived till to be around like the Great Depression time, like early 1920s, like 1926 is when he might have passed away. But he wrote some books. He wrote some very good books, and I wanted to get into one of the books today, a book called Self Mastery Through Autosuggestion, and I will leave the book in the description below because there is a link on YouTube to where you can listen to the video, the audio. And this guy goes into so much detail the way he describes how the will and the imagination, how they work together and how they don't work together. And so I really want to get your guys' opinion. Please comment in the description below your thoughts on the will and imagination, because I want to get a conversation going to see where you guys stand, to see how you guys feel about what's more powerful, what's more important, because this whole thing around free will is and willing things is such a big argument, as well as a discussion in the LOA community, because people say, oh, you do have free will, and then you have people say, no, we don't have free will, and then people say, oh, I can imagine this, and then so hopefully what I'm getting ready to read to you from Emile Coue will kind of help start to break down some thoughts that you may have or may not have thought about in regards to the will and the imagination. And again, this is from Emile Coue's book Self Mastery Through Autosuggestion. And Emile Coue, he kind of in a sense like made this popular. He coined it, you know what I mean? And because autosuggestion, for those that don't know, is kind of the same as affirmations, basically, you know what I mean? And so what he was known for is he was known for like psychotherapy. He was known for, hypnosis, doing things like that. Like he would have a subject fall asleep, and then he would stand maybe a few feet from the bed as they were sleeping, and he would chant things to them, you know what I mean? And he goes over examples in his books of doing this for anybody, children. You can do this for children who aren't behaving, different things like that, different scenarios. And he goes over it in his book. But I wanted to read some things because I took a couple notes, and then I wanted to break it down with you guys. And again, comment your thoughts below, because I think this will be an eye opener for a lot of you guys struggling with this thought process of will versus imagination, because I think he does a great job at breaking it down in a way that you probably never heard before. Okay, so I'm going to read it, and then we're going to go into discussing each separate part that I took over in the notes. So something that I wrote down that he said goes like this: the will must not be brought into play when practicing autosuggestion. If not in agreement with imagination, and the imagination says you are willing it, then it won't be. Not only does not one attain what one wants, but the exact reverse is brought about. Powerful. I'm going to read that one more time. The will must not be brought into play when practicing autosuggestion. If not in agreement with the imagination, and the imagination says you are willing it, then it won't be. Not only does not one attain what one wants, but the exact reverse is brought about. Okay, so let's break that down, because that's some powerful stuff that he just wrote. So basically, in a sense, what he's saying, his opinion, And you can compare this to Neville, because as we know, most people follow and study Neville because Neville is like the pioneer to most people, and Neville saturates the market. The market is so saturated with his opinions, his material. But let's break this down to what Coue is saying. You know what I mean? The will must not be brought into play when practicing autosuggestion. Meaning, you must, if he believes that if you're walking around all day, basically, you know what I mean, trying to will your affirmations, trying to will your autosuggestion into play, if it's not in agreement with the images that you already have because we all have images that we've basically programmed ourselves that are perpetual over our life period, however old you are, whether it's 20 something years, 30 something years, 40 something years, 50 something years, we naturally have images that we have conjured up and we believe that are stored in us. So when we come out of nowhere and try to forcefully say an affirmation and say, oh, I am rich, or my SP loves me. My SP loves me. My SP is constantly thinking about me. My SP, which you hear a lot of these guys in YouTube videos, say to affirm, but the words that you're affirming don't match the imagination, the images in your head. It's basically futile. It's pointless. Nothing's going to happen. And then Emile goes on to say, and his belief is, he goes on to say the exact opposite will be shown to you. So if you continuously force with your words, trying to force your will of, oh, my SP really loves me, my SP constantly my SP, and you guys haven't been in contact in a while, and you don't believe it in your imagination, you saying that, he believes like, oh, what's going to really end up happening is the exact reverse is going to come about. Meaning you're not going to, if you're saying your SP constantly loves you and you don't believe it, you're going to perpetuate more of that. More of that is going to show up in your experience with your person. More of them is going to show up of them not showing you attention, them not showing you love, because you're trying to will it with your words. You don't necessarily believe it. So I thought that was pretty powerful. So I wanted to share that with you guys. Now, I wrote down four steps that he also wrote out in together with, the will and the imagination. So step one is, he goes like this: when the will and the imagination are antagonistic, the imagination wins at any exception. Okay, let's break this down one more time. When the will and the imagination are antagonistic, the imagination wins at any exception. So basically, when the will and the imagination are going back and forth with each other, whatever is in your mind, the images that you have in your mind always overpower, will always win, no matter how much you try to affirm whatever it is that you're affirming. So Emile Coue believes that I don't care how many times you say an affirmation. I don't care how many times you just randomly say it. If you're not in that auto-suggested state, your words are futile. They mean nothing. And you're going to bring about, like he said a little bit earlier, you're going to bring about the exact opposite, because your imagination is what wins. The image in your heads is what wins always. It's what you believe because it's what you know. You're keeping count. You're keeping track of everything, of your past experiences, of your current experiences, what's going on in your current reality. And so that's going to win over your will every single time, which is why a lot of people affirm themselves to death and they don't see any results, because they don't realize they're trying to will it instead of letting it happen with the imagination, with whatever you see in your imagination. Because the way, in my opinion, from reading his book, is to whenever you do autosuggestion or affirmations, is to be, for the most part, is to be in that drowsy state, as Neville, as you guys know, study Neville, living in the inn. Okay, so now let's go on to number two, to part two of what he says. When conflict between the will and imagination, the force of the imagination is in direct ratio to the square of the will. Now let's go over that again. When conflict between will and imagination, the force of imagination is in direct ratio to the square of the will. So basically, what he's saying here is with the conflict, you know what I mean, of the imagination, the force of the imagination is a direct ratio of the square of the will. So they go hand in hand. You know what I mean? Whatever the will and the imagination, the result is going to be based off one or the other. You know what I mean? It's direct in ratio to the square of the will. When conflict between will and the imagination, the force of the imagination is in direct ratio of the will. The force, the power of the imagination is based off of whatever you're trying to will. You know what I mean? If that makes sense. Okay, so let's go on to the next one. When the will and the imagination are in agreement, one does not add to the other, but one multiplies by the other. When the will and imagination are in agreement, one does not add to the other, but one multiplies the other. And the imagination can be directed. Okay, so I think that's powerful. So basically, it's which is obviously common sense if you've been studying this stuff for a while. You know what I mean? When you're willing something in imagination, when they're in agreement, basically, as I've said before in past videos, when there's synergy, between the thoughts you think, the words you speak, and the emotions and the feelings you feel, you know what I mean? Then when you say to the mountain, move, the mountain must move. But the problem is there's not a lot of synergy. There's no synergy between one of the three pieces. Like you can name it the Holy Trinity. You know what I'm saying? The thoughts you think, the words you speak, the emotions you feel. There's no synergy. A lot of times people don't see results is because there's no synergy. You're seeing one thing, as Emile Coue is talking about. You're seeing one thing in your mind, but you're speaking another thing. So you believe one thing up here, but you're speaking something from here, and you're feeling something totally different from here. So there's no synergy. So therefore, when you speak words, there can be no fruit. There's no fruition. It can't come to pass because these things are out of alignment. And like he's saying, your autosuggestion isn't going to be picked up by the subconscious mind because you're out of whack. And the imagination wins every time because your imagination knows that that's true. How can your imagination win when you have no experience of a future event that you want to happen? And that's why it's extremely hard for people to affirm and to imagine things, is because you're recollecting something from the past. So how can you predict the future when you don't have no evidence of that feeling of a future event that's happened? How can you know what it feels like to get your SP back? How can you know what it feels like to be married if you've never been married? How can you feel all of these emotions and feelings? Basically is what it sounds like he's saying, when you've never, experienced it, and that's why as the book goes on, he begins to get into the auto-suggested state, which is basically Neville's state akin to sleep. You get in that drowsy state and you just repeat your auto-suggestive affirmations, and then that helps it seep into the subconscious mind more. That helps you believe it more, because you guys got to understand something. There's beta, alpha, theta, delta. Most of you guys, when you're saying your affirmations and doing your auto-suggestion, you're doing it from a beta state. Beta is like when you're awake, walking, you know what I mean? Just doing your everyday life. You're doing things like that. When you're doing your auto-suggestion, your affirmations, or your visualizations to make the imagination more powerful, to make the imagination believe it more, you have to be in the alpha/theta state. Alpha is in the state that you want to be in when you're trying to learn something, whatever that may be. Learn math, learn, science, whatever the case may be. Theta is really the state that you want to get to when you really want to impress your subconscious mind, which is what he talks about later in the book, getting into that hypnosis state. That's how people get hypnotized. And then delta is like full blown, passed out, sleep. You're not hearing that. You're not aware of anything going on around you. But theta, you're still kind of aware. You're still in that drowsy state, but you're still conscious of what's going on. Like your theta is like when you're in that world of you're getting ready to fall asleep, but you're still awake. That's the state you want to be in. And that's the state that's best for autosuggestion as well as imagining. But from here, as you can see, it's really interesting how he breaks it down, and how he's saying if your will must not be brought into play when practicing autosuggestion, and if it's not in agreement with the imagination, and imagination you says you are willing it, then it won't be. And so he really believes that he believes your imagination triumphs whatever it is you're trying to speak over your life. He really believes that. That's basically what he's saying. And like he says, the conflict between the will and the imagination, the force of the imagination, is in direct ratio of the square will. Super powerful. So I think basically what he's saying is it's so important for your imagination and your will to be in alignment. Because, and let's reference this to a specific person, because a lot of people, they say affirmations for SP, but they're out of alignment. Their imagination doesn't agree with them. Their imagination, their feelings are always constantly thinking about the past. Oh, my SP did this. Your imagination's thinking about all the messed up shit your SP did. But your words are saying, oh, my SP loves me. And your imagination is like, hold up, wait a second. Nah, that's not true. No, your SP doesn't love you. Look at what they just did last week. Look at what they just did last month. Look at just what they did last year. Look at all of this stuff going on. You know, so he's teaching, don't do it that way. Don't, if you're going to trick your mind and you're going to retrain your mind, it's important to get into that meditative, auto-suggested state first before you try to force your will, because most people are trying to force their will, force their words, force what they want. They're trying to do that without getting in the state first. And that's why I think a lot of people don't see results in the 3D, and why, a lot of things seem to be going backwards. You know, people say, oh, I just did this. I actually just had somebody send something to me, and they said, oh, I was saying affirmations and then I just had this happen, or I had this dream, or like I'm afraid, and it's fear. Yeah, because you might be getting ready to that point to where you're bringing, like he said, the exact opposite potentially, because you don't believe what you're saying. Your imagination, your mind doesn't believe the words that you're saying potentially, but it does change. It will get better if you continue to do it over time. You just have to do it, and an easier way to do it is, like I said, like he said, like a lot of that have been studying this for a while, is to get in that drowsy auto-suggested state instead of doing it from a state of just, going through your regular day-to-day lives. You know what I mean? So I thought that was really interesting. I wanted to share that with you guys. Please comment below your thoughts on what Emile Coue has to say about auto-suggestion and affirmations and that sort of thing versus what Neville says. I think they're kind of on the same page, but Emile Coue is just saying it in a different way. But it kind of sounds like to me they still go hand in hand, as I believe a lot of this LOA stuff, no matter the teacher, I believe on some level pretty much all of the principles go hand in hand, and they're very similar, even if there are minor differences or whatever the intricacies may be. All right, guys, it's been your man Marv for another episode of Marv's Room. I'll check you guys next time. You know where, you know when.